Hello and welcome to you all. This is another edition of Fake News Friday here on True North, swimming through the blizzard of lies, trying to make sense of it all and having a little bit of fun in the process. I am Andrew Lawton, joined as always by Harrison Faulkner. Harrison, how was the week?
Pretty good, Andrew. I mean, we've got some hilarious stories to get into. Some just I would say pretty emblematic of the state of legacy media right now. So it's going to be a good show, but all in all, a pretty good week. We're kind of coming down off the Emergencies Act hearings, which is a welcome relief.
Coming down, you talk about it like it was just some big prolonged acid trip, but it might have been better and more tolerable if it were. I think we're going to start with a bit of a victory lap here, because I think we can claim some vindication, even not True North directly, but I think in general, the issues that we talk about with this debate that took place Wednesday night in Toronto, the Munk debate, which if you've never been, they're very well put together. They debate really key issues. They bring out good people. And the debate was on the following resolution: be it resolved, don't trust mainstream media. Advocating for the motion, Douglas Murray and Matt Taibbi. Against it, Malcolm Gladwell and Michelle Goldberg. Now, the debate itself, you'd think, okay, what's the big deal? So what Munk debate does, when you go there, everyone is polled on what they believe on the motion. When people walked in, so in favor of don't trust mainstream media, 48%, con 52%, so a pretty even split. The final vote, when they all left after the debate had taken place, pro 67%, con 33%. So the way you measure success in a Munk debate is not by your final tally, but by the swing from the first tally to the end. So by the end of it, people were resoundingly in favor of this idea that the mainstream media cannot be trusted.
I mean, it's just a perfect visualization, Andrew. Those graphics. I think that of what we're seeing right now, why we're seeing groups like True North grow and why we're seeing so much distrust in the legacy media, it's because even when legacy media advocates are forced to try and defend themselves, forced to try and say to a group of people, well, yeah, we know that people don't trust us anymore, but here's maybe why you should compared to these online news outlets. It's obvious that they're just losing their grip, their control on the narrative, and it's just perfect, Aaron. I mean, the Munk Debate's social media account pulled quotes from the evening, and I just want to read a couple of them because it kind of shows you. I mean, I wish I was there. It just shows you what the argument was for people who were trying to defend the legacy media. It was almost embarrassing. I mean, one of the best quotes that they had all night, I guess, for the defense of legacy media came from Michelle Goldberg, the New York Times columnist, and she said, "The mainstream media has gotten the big things right." I'm sorry, but last I checked, throughout most of COVID, they didn't get most. They got most of that wrong. Freedom Convoy in Canada, they got most of that wrong. How much have they gotten wrong?
Hunter Biden's laptop.
Well,
I mean, that was
story,
a deliberate subversion of it.
Exactly. The entire Trump-Russia scandal, which turned out to be a nothing burger, they were rolling with that for years. So for them to basically say, of the New York Times columnist to say, we got the big things right, it's embarrassing almost. It's embarrassing, and if that was their argument, and this is the result of it, clearly it didn't fly in the room. And just take a look at some of these quotes as well. Douglas Murray, who's from the UK, he's a great commentator. He came in and just basically laid it out for everyone in the Canadian audience. Just said, your mainstream media is funded by the government, a totally corrupted system. And basically the best that your side has been able to come up with so far tonight is to say, we get things wrong quite often, but you should trust us anyway. So that's basically it. That's really all they can offer, Andrew. It's embarrassing for them.
I wasn't able to see the whole thing live, unfortunately, so I'm going to watch the video when it's posted. But a friend of mine who was there said that Douglas Murray actually talked about the Freedom Convoy in his comments and talked about how there was this divide between people that were reporting on the narrative they wanted to be true and those that actually went out and talked to people like Rupa Subramanya, people like you and I, and a lot of others from different independent media outlets. And the thing that was interesting, and I don't want to generalize too much here, but the Munk debate is a downtown Toronto event. It attracts a lot of downtown Toronto elites. Now, they're obviously a type of elite that is okay to go into things with an open mind, but if you think of that context of it, the vote swing is particularly important. So this was like a group of downtown, well-to-do Toronto types that by the end of it were saying 2-1, yeah, we don't really trust the mainstream media.
No, exactly. That's an important note to make. I mean, the Munk debates are not I would say likely.
It's not like the Rebel News Live event I was at last
exactly.
week.
I was
Like,
just gonna say,
it's not a
not
really hard and fast, like dyed in the wool, like independent media rah group. It's a group that is typically very much in that, not Laurentian elites, but certainly the Toronto elite category.
Well, yes, Andrew. They are the Globe and Mail readers. They are the CBC lovers. I mean, I think that's a pretty safe assumption to make. And for Douglas Murray and for Matt Taibbi, Matt Taibbi is an amazing journalist, I have to say. You really can't pin him down one side or the other. He just tells it like he sees it. That's a very it's a valuable asset to have as a journalist today because it comes so far and few between. But that's a really important note to make. The Munk debate was not full of, I would say, I don't think it was 100% True North readers, Andrew. Like I said, I think it's more Globe and Mail, CBC readers, legacy media types who were there for an interesting conversation. And I think they really got something that was worth noting. I mean, look, it was another quote that's from Malcolm Gladwell in this that basically said, again, you just got to look at the social media account to see the quality of arguments that were being made. You could see Douglas Murray and Matt Taibbi really getting to the point, bringing up key examples of failure in the legacy media. And then the legacy media defenders were trying to just, make these grand statements and say, well, it's not like, as apparently Malcolm Gladwell said, it's not like there are a bunch of legacy media journalists getting into a room in the morning and discussing what the narrative is. I mean, I actually think that is what it is. Maybe it's not true, but I don't get a front row seat into the Globe and Mail editorial in the morning editorial meeting. But I am pretty sure actually that they do have a narrative, Andrew. They do stick to that narrative, and they just don't report things that don't go in line with it. I mean, it's pretty obvious that's the case.
Yeah, and I will say that one of the great things about the Munk debates is that people that go there, generally speaking, I think have at least a tolerance for the other side. And this swing that we're seeing here has happened before. There was the famous one, I can't remember how long ago it was, maybe 6 years ago, between Mark Steyn and Nigel Farage on one side and Louise Arbour and Simon Schama on the other, and they were debating refugee policy. And the room was stacked against Mark Steyn and Nigel Farage, but by the end of it, the room had come around to their side, because certain things, when people hear the facts and they hear them laid out, they realize there really isn't a compelling argument for it. And I think that line that Douglas Murray gave is quite a strong one, that, yeah, you're saying that you keep getting it wrong, but we should keep trusting you anyway. And Michelle Goldberg's view, well, yeah, we get the big things, so you got to, but even then you don't. But even if you did, that's hardly the selling point you think. And I think one of the challenges here is that we're seeing increasingly this line that some people attempt to draw between official or so-called real media and alternative and independent media. And we saw this in a roundtable that the Public Order Emergency Commission hosted this week. And you can take a look at the clip of this one particular comment here.
So what we've seen is that more and more extremist groups use what we call alternative media. My colleagues were talking about the social media, but more and more what we see are fringe social media that are emerging. And I don't want to advertise any of them, so I'm not going to give you specific names. They were extremely present during the convoy in Ottawa, and we saw journalists. So they're self-made journalists, because anybody can proclaim that they themselves are journalists using these platforms. And so they were producing re-information or alternative information on the events. So they were saying there were 100,000 people, but you've seen the police reports, even on a big day, there were about 10,000 people in Ottawa. And so that's the kind of information manipulation we see. But that is a direct result of the distrust of official media. But it's now widespread within the general public. So these alternative media have emerged, and some have a lot of followers, hundreds of thousands of followers, and they appear just as credible as mainstream media with reporters on site, on the ground. So I think I wouldn't call it a war, but there's definitely a rivalry between these alternate media and mainstream media. And of course, these media need funding, and they do have access to substantial funding.
So, I mean, what he's saying there, and this is a University of Sherbrooke professor who's on a harmful online content advisory board, so I think the bias is probably pretty inherently visible there. But what he's saying is that extremist groups use alternative media. So anything that's independent, anything that's not on the government payroll is just some tool of radicals.
Yeah, and then in that clip you can see as well, he makes the point about the growing rivalry between alternative media and legacy media, and how these
not much of a rivalry if the Munk debate results are to be trusted.
Well, that's exactly right. And just I would be so interested if we were able to take this question and take it outside of the downtown Toronto, sort of Globe and Mail CBC sphere of influence, and really get a real consensus from Canadians about what they feel. I mean, I am absolutely not. I'm not afraid of those results, but I have to say, I bet you some in the legacy media would be. It's interesting to note, though, he says that there's a rivalry between the alternative media and the legacy media, and then he makes the point about how these alternative media sites, they have a large following. They have a really large following, and then he also makes the point, Andrew, which is I thought to be very interesting. He says they appear like legacy media journalists because they have reporters on the ground, on the scene. And you were at the Freedom Convoy. I was at the Freedom Convoy, and Rebel were at the Freedom Convoy. Lots of independent media were there, among thousands of citizen journalists who were there with their own cameras telling the truth, not with the giant TV broadcast camera, the producer, the cameraman, the other producer, and then the journalist.
The bodyguard.
Right, exactly. We didn't need a 4-person team to just tell the truth, and the legacy media did. And I think what's really going on here is there's a kind of a growing concern from whether it be academia, these legacy media journalists, about the fact that they once were able to have confidence that everyone who saw the world through their eyes, everyone who thought the same thing about the country, they could basically control who was a journalist. And the idea that people who were, maybe not from the universities, not from the big media outlets, could potentially be journalists, scares them. And they want to do everything they can to villainize them, to basically say that they attract extremists. They're not telling the truth. He says that they manipulate the information. That to me tells a lot about the fear that these people have on the narrative, that they no longer have access to the complete control of the narrative because groups like True North, other independent media outlets, and just the citizen himself with his camera are now doing a better job of telling the truth. That speaks volumes to me.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just say to close on this, it's not a left-right issue as well. There are lots of people on the political left that I think are also increasingly tiring of the mainstream media narrative, which is why when I say independent media, it's not about conservative media. I want more voices. I want more people in this space so that consumers of media can decide things for themselves. And I think a case in point of this is this Associated Press article, which CTV picked up and a number of outlets around the world about China's COVID approach. Now, let me first off say that when you look at all these protests that are taking place in China right now, people are protesting policies that are rooted in China's zero COVID approach. This view that the Chinese regime has that one COVID case is too many. So they're using this to lock people in their homes, to do these incredibly draconian and Orwellian crackdowns, to keep COVID passes and vaccine mandates and passports going almost indefinitely. And the headline, China's zero COVID limit saved lives, but there's no clear exit. So yeah, it's great at saving lives, but the problem is that they don't have an off-ramp for it. Nothing else is wrong with it. If they put in an end date, it would all be fine, is what they're saying.
This goes right to the heart, Andrew, of why so many people are just sick and tired of the legacy media. I mean, they couldn't, if you read this article, it really just uncovers a lot about what's really going on behind the legacy media narrative. They first talk about how, the zero COVID policy of literally forcing you to stay in your apartment, in your massive high-rise building for months on end, not being able to leave, in some cases, welding your doors shut in China. I mean, there are videos all over social media of the Chinese police welding doors to apartments shut so that you can't leave. it's tyrannical. It's completely insane with their whole idea of trying to basically, like you said, stop any case of COVID from entering the country. It's never going to happen. Everyone knows that it's a failed policy, but they're doing it anyway. So the article rides along the Chinese protest interest that's going around the world. Everyone's trying to pay attention to what's going on. So this article picks it up and says, well, yeah, the zero COVID policy, it saved lives according to the Chinese Communist Party data. Which, again, if you take the Communist Party data, you take that data at your own peril. I mean, I don't think you should trust that data for a second. They apparently had the article pumps up the Chinese zero COVID policy as well, saying, well, China's policy resulted in the lowest deaths per capita in the world. I mean, I don't believe that for a second, personally. I'll leave that up to you, the viewer, to decide what you want to take of it. But then at the very end of the article, at the very bottom of the article, they kind of let the truth slip, and it ends up just becoming an advertisement for Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Who could have guessed, Andrew? Just look at this paragraph at the end here. Dr. Bharat Pankhania, an infectious diseases expert at the University of Exeter, said China should import mRNA vaccines made by Pfizer and Moderna. Sounds a lot like an advertisement for the vaccines, I have to say. I mean, it is pretty brazen. And then at the end, he also says, this should not be about saving face. The Chinese population is clearly fed up with lockdown after lockdown, and the quickest way out is to immunize as fast as possible. So there you go, Andrew. Who could have guessed, actually? The policy is just to vaccinate and not to actually just call out what's really going on, which is tyrannical COVID policy that the Chinese people are clearly fed up with.
Yeah, it also forgets that, like, all these Western countries like Canada that said you would vaccinate your way away from restrictions, kept restrictions in place long after the vaccination rate got saturated to, well over 80, pushing 90%. So absolutely absurd. And it's terrible that the media is not seeing through this. I mean, you could save a life, but if while saving a life, you are trampling on everyone's civil liberties and making that life not worth living, which is what China's doing, you're not actually able to claim a win, in my view on this. But absolutely shameful that Chinese propaganda finds such an easy home in legacy media outlets. We go to a bit of a more fun one here. A legacy media journalist went clothing shopping, Harrison.
Yes, Andrew, he went Christmas shopping, tried to get in on the early deals. He found himself, and I really do feel bad for Glenn. He had to withstand some serious danger here. He went to one of the outlets just outside Ottawa, and take a look at what he was faced with. I mean, the absolute horror, Andrew, the absolute horror of seeing an Under Armour sweater with the word, wait for it, freedom, with a Canada flag, Andrew. I mean, it's bordering on hate speech. This is the kind of stuff I think that C11, the online, all this legislation, the online hate speech bill that's going to come through, this is the kind of stuff that we need to censor because it's just too much to handle, Andrew.
Yeah, so this is Glenn McGregor, Ottawa journalist, went to I don't know if it's Tanger or Tangier, or maybe it's in Algeria, I don't know. He went to this Tanger outlet mall in Canada, which is a suburb of Ottawa. He is there, he sees this, and doesn't actually comment on why it troubles him. He plays it very smart. He just posts the tweet, he plays it straight, and then everyone immediately jumps on him as though he's effectively triggered by the word freedom. Now, here's the thing. Glenn McGregor covered the convoy, so I assume that what he's seeing there is that perhaps this is a nod by Under Armour to the Freedom Convoy. But the reality is the Under Armour Freedom campaign has nothing to do with the convoy, nothing to do with Canadian politics. It is actually about veterans. It is a veterans initiative. Proceeds from the sale of Under Armour Freedom products go towards veterans who are fighting for freedom. But Glenn shares this, and here's just some of the response that he gets. Terry Hagan writes, wow, they just lost my business. Ms. T. Mick says, what? Honestly, I have to throw out so much now. Anne Bellissimo says, never buy from that company again. Now, whether these people were Under Armour customers to begin with, I have no idea. But the point is that now people are whipped up into a frenzy based on what is a misrepresentation, tacitly anyway, of what this thing was. Because I don't have an easy time believing it was just being shared because he liked the pattern that was on it. I think the Libs of TikTok response was my favorite here. This is hate speech, literally shaking. Did you survive?
Yes, no, exactly. I mean, that's all you can really do when you look at something like this. It's absurd, Andrew. And I mean, it's we've reached a point now where the legacy media, Glenn McGregor being one of the main offenders, in my opinion, because of the convoy, have been so shaken that the sight of the Canadian flag, and we know this to be true because the legacy media write articles about the Canadian flag all the time. The Canadian flag being a symbol of hate, being seen as a freedom convoy symbol. It's a negative thing. The sight of the Canadian flag is horrifying to some of these people, let alone, Andrew, even worse, the word freedom on top of the Canadian flag. I mean, you can't even begin to imagine how horrifying it must be for these legacy media journalists. But think about this. This all goes back to the conversation we started the show off with about legacy media and independent media. I don't for a second believe that the Canadian public, seeing the word freedom and the Canadian flag, are triggered, are hit with a tsunami of phantom honking, Andrew, that they can't handle themselves. I mean, I don't believe that to be for a second. But legacy media journalists who created their sort of their information silo, where they really believe this stuff. They believe the phantom honking. They believe the fact that the Canadian flag is seen as this.
They believe that freedom is now this fringe ideal.
Right, exactly. They literally believe this stuff, and then that becomes their reality. That becomes their truth. And there's just no way. There's no way that is what the majority of Canadians really think of when they see the word freedom. There's no way that that's what the majority of Canadians think of when they see the Canadian flag. But it takes a certain person, I really do believe this, to be triggered by the word freedom and a Canadian flag, so much so that they'd be willing to embarrass themselves by posting it on social media. He didn't add context, but like you said, we all know what he's getting at here. It takes a certain level of complete, removal from, I believe, the normalcy, real life, reality, to be willing to post something like this. Totally absurd, ridiculous, and honestly, what else can you do other than laugh and just say, you hope that someone like Glenn can recover one day from this horrifying experience.
Yes, indeed. And you know what? We always have the quiet comfort of CBC to get us through the tough moments. Harris, why don't you take the lead on this one? Because I still haven't been able to figure out what on earth is happening.
Well, for those of you that saw Ratio yesterday, I brought this up as the Ratio of the Week award. The CBC Gem, which is the streaming service you have to pay more for, because the $1.2 billion that we all pay to CBC isn't enough. If you
felt they need more of your money, there is an option. Yes.
And to access such gems as this, I mean, you have to take a look at this. I won't even bother to try and explain it. All you got to do is just watch it. It's less than a minute. Do your best. We hope that you stick around after the next 56 seconds to hear our commentary on this, because it is a bit difficult. But watch this.
Sabi, are you listening to me? Sabi, are you listening to me?
Totally.
Then they said they're open to deepening their relationship with me at other galleries in the foreseeable future. And I was like, what does that mean?
Are these chia vulvas?
So there I am thinking, I'm getting a very subtle brush off. And then they offer me, are you ready?
Yep.
You seem weird.
I'm not.
You sure?
Yep.
Berlin.
They offered you the city in Germany?
Da!
That's Russian.
To work at a gallery in the queerest city in the universe. Germany literally legalized a third gender option on birth certificates. Can you imagine curating there? Well, paid internshipping there. Sabi, I'm gonna have the most delicious orgy. God is like, good.
Yeah, totally. Allahu Akbar.
So, Andrew, I mean, that is comedy in the eyes of Canada's state broadcaster. They've got $1.2 billion to work with. Some of that I presume goes to salary. Some of that I presume goes to their news coverage, which is pitiful. But you have to imagine a good amount of money goes to the comedy wing of the CBC. And this is what they come up with. A story, a comedy bit about chia vulvas, if I'm getting that right. The show is called Sort of, and the dialogue where they kind of just slip in the Germany being the queerest country in the world. They legalized a third gender on the birth certificate, and how this woman says, I'm going to Germany, God is like great. And then the other person says, Allahu Akbar. Like, oh my God, it's so hilarious. I mean, that's just brilliant stuff, Andrew. Totally brilliant. And I mean, I'm not even going to try and bother to add even more context. Just let me know.
I actually love this in a way, and the point that I made on Twitter when I saw this is that, you know, everyone jumps up and down on Pierre Poilievre for talking about defunding the CBC, but I feel CBC makes the most compelling arguments for defunding the CBC when they publish stuff like this. So here's the thing, I'm not actually a prude. I don't care about Chia. I believe vulve is the proper plural, if my Latin is correct. It's, you know, VULVAE, although that probably is not the most important point about it all. In any case, I feel like I don't actually care about the bid. I care that Canadians don't have to support it or not support it like they do with any private sector thing. Like if True North, for example, were to pivot from Fake News Friday and the Andrew Lawton Show and Ratioed, and instead do something like this, the audience would be the one that had to decide if it was worth supporting us in continuation or not. CBC fails or succeeds ratings-wise, it doesn't matter. They still keep getting the money, and typically they get more of the money. So take from that what you will, and know that the queerest gallery in the world has Chia Vulva. So maybe that was actually the reboot of The National. You never know. That does it for us. You can catch Harrison on Ratioed. You can catch me on The Andrew Lawton Show, and you can catch us both next week on Fake News Friday. Thank you, and have a great weekend.